Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The FCC has officially changed the definition of broadband, not as fast as some would like, but also not unexpected. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So the FCC put out a notice of what they were planning on doing back in November, and they have now made it official. So I've linked to this in the description of the video. So you see here, FCC increases broadband speed benchmark dated today. And again, I linked to that in the description as well as where you can download that. I also linked to when they did this inquiry back in November of 2023, if you want to check that and download some of the files that are available there. But I was going to go ahead and just real quickly look at this announcement, this press release from them. So you see here again, dated today. FCC increases broadband speed benchmarks. Annual agency assessment of high-speed internet service deployment establishes new standard to better reflect the broadband needs of American households. And they're talking specifically that annual assessment, again, of what was completed in November, or the announcement was made in November as to what they were planning on doing. And they were asking questions, getting comments from folks at that point. But now they've officially made it 100 by 20, which is what we were certainly anticipating. And there's reasons for that, which I'll talk about here. So see here, the FCC adopted its annual assessment of whether advanced telecommunications capability, and that would be broadband service, that's from the I think the Telecommunications Act, is being deployed in a reasonable and timely fashion across the U.S. In addition to deployment, the report considers broadband affordability, adoption, availability, and equitable access when determining whether broadband is being deployed in a reasonable and timely fashion to all Americans. The Commission's report, issued pursuant to 706 of the Telecom Act of 1996, raises the Commission's benchmark for high-speed fixed broadband to download speeds of 100 megabits per second and upload speeds of 20 megabits per second, a four-fold increase from the 25 by 3 benchmark set by the Commission in 2015. So it's been since 2015 that it's been 25.3. And 25.3 in 2015 was reasonable. Technology changed. It's not like we didn't have fiber back then, but the cost of fiber and the impact of suddenly going to something faster than 25.3 at the time, considering what it would have cost to do that, the FCC has to take that into account. And they have to take that into account now with the 100 by 20 number. So a lot of people wanted it to be 100 by 100 to go to a symmetrical kind of speed to get the upload speeds higher. But again, every time you change the benchmark or the official speed for broadband, then suddenly people who had broadband don't have it anymore. Their service hasn't changed, but the definition changes. So somebody who maybe had, let's say, 50 by 10, and it was considered under 25 by 3, it was considered broadband, it would then suddenly be not broadband. Now, with the funding programs that have come out, ARPA funding and BEAD program, some of those programs requiring, let's say, 100 by 20 as a minimum, or in some cases even service that could support 100 by 100, but usually it's 100 by 20 minimum, certainly in the BEAD, 100 by 20, because in BEAD, 25 by 3, less than 25 by 3 would be considered unserved. So that's the old definition that we're looking at there. 25 by 3, anything less than that was unserved. But they have that second category of 100 by 20. Anything between 25 by 3 but under 100 by 20 is considered underserved. So I think that was smart on their part of saying, we need a second category if we're going to go forward with this funding. They couldn't really, again, say it needed to be 100 by 100. They couldn't, they had a definition of broadband. Again, you got to be careful with that, because suddenly you're reclassifying, millions of Americans around the country. And the whole point of this is to try to get broadband to everybody. And if you keep upping the speed, then you keep dropping people out. And it all depends on whether you can do it or not. If we had the speed as 100 by 100 right now, we would not be able to, with the BEAD funding that we have, get everybody broadband. It's very possible now with 100 by 20, again, being underserved, anything over that being served, that we can reach everybody with broadband, and everybody with fiber, and whoever we can't reach with fiber, then with, let's say, fixed wireless, some other alternative technology like a licensed fixed wireless service, or licensed by rule like CBRS spectrum. But if you went to 100 by 100, that might be a little bit more difficult. So that's the point there. And the other thing is that the more that we get fiber, then the fewer people we have out there that don't have the ability to go up to much, much higher speeds. Again, if you have this fixed wireless, then it's going to be harder to get higher speeds over time like you would with fiber. With fiber, if you got fiber out there, and let's say you start with GPON, it's not that big a deal to go to XGS-PON, that's going from 1 gig to 10 gig, and not that big a deal to go to 25 gig PON, depending on the equipment you have. For example, you've got Nokia in the same OLT, the same cabinet, you can put GPON, XGS-PON, and 25 GS-PON, 25 gig per second PON, just by swapping out a card. So you're talking about really going up to significant speeds that we don't need right now as far as, let's say, residential customers. Businesses obviously need faster speeds, but even businesses, 25 gig, most of them don't need that, 25 gig symmetrical. So that's an important factor as well, is that once we get fiber out there to most everybody, then we're not going to have to go back to the well like we had to do over and over again as we didn't have fiber. So, when broadband definitions were, I forget, it might have been 4 by 1 at one point, maybe I think it was 10 by 1 and then 25 by 3, and you'd go out there and you'd say, okay, we're going to fund this area in 25 by 3. It's got to be at least 25 by 3, and that's what was deployed in some cases. But it wasn't fiber. It could have been DSL or something else where it's doing 25 by 3 or 10 by 1, like I say, maybe a slower speed. 10 by 1 DSL supported that. Well, then you got to go back to the well, get more money so that you can then upgrade those areas to fiber. Well, once we get most everybody on fiber and we've got those outlying, really expensive areas on other technologies, then maybe we can look at this again in the future and finish off everybody, because it won't take, there'll be very expensive areas, but the cost, let's say, of fiber may come down, the cost of the technology. So I think it'll be more reasonable then to say, okay, well, we're going to take another swing at this finally to get everybody on fiber. But if you went again to 100 by 100, then you're leaving a lot of people out that can't get fiber, and you can't get them broadband without it costing a fortune, and we don't have the funds for that right now. So I think that was smart the way they did that with 100 by 20. It wasn't an official definition yet, but they had that underserved, and they said, this is where we want to be, is 120 by better, and now it's official as far as this is the benchmark speed. The increase in the Commission's fixed speed benchmark for advanced telecommunications capability is based on the standards now used in multiple federal and state programs, such as BEAD program and multiple USF programs, consumer usage patterns, and what is actually available from and marketed by internet service providers. The report concludes that advanced telecom capability is not being deployed in a reasonable and timely fashion based on the total number of Americans in rural areas, and people living on tribal lands who lack access to such capability, and the fact that these gaps in deployment are not closing rapidly enough. Of course, we've got a lot in process to do that with the BEAD program. Using the agency's broadband data collection deployment data for the first time, rather than the Form 477 data, and that's very important, by the way. So when they were doing these reports in the past, it was using the Form 477 data, and there we did not have a national broadband map that was down to each location, each home, each business, but we had it by census block group. So if you had a service provider that they said they provided service in that census block, then to one home, then that census block was considered served. However, it could be that they only served a portion of it, maybe only a few homes out of that census block. So, it was not very accurate, and we didn't really have an idea of who had broadband and who didn't, and it really meant that we were leaving a lot of people out, because as companies would go to serve those areas of census blocks, they would cherry pick the easiest areas and not worry about the others. Well, now we know with this broadband map who has broadband and who doesn't at each location, and obviously people complain about the accuracy of the map, and are all the locations correct? Are they all marked? And are they all actually getting what they're saying? But I mean, it's way better than it used to be. So let's be thankful for that. And it's going to get better over time as there are more challenges from consumers and from communities, those kinds of things. And broadband service providers themselves will be making those challenges. It's just that the data is about 6 months. It's always 6 months behind. The data that we're looking at right now is from December of 2023. Actually, I'm sorry, it's June from June 2023. When the next map comes out, it will be December 2023. And that's due to be out here in I think a few weeks probably. It usually comes out in, I think it's maybe April, end of March, April, something like that. So you're always 6 months behind or so on that data at least, but it's way better than it was. So what they find with the VDC data now, fixed terrestrial broadband service, excluding satellite, has not been physically deployed to approximately 24 million Americans, including almost 28% of Americans in rural areas and more than 23% of people living in tribal lands. So again, I'm assuming that's using the new definition. And they're excluding satellite, which is interesting because satellite in a lot of areas can do over 100 by 20, but they're excluding that. And I can see why, because there is always a concern about capacity on the satellites, because Starlink, for example, they will launch the service and they'll have pretty good speeds in an area. And then as they get more subscribers in that area, then the speeds start to drop and they have to launch more satellites for the constellation that goes over that certain area. And that's one issue. But now they are starting to launch some higher capacity satellites, and they've been touting, I think they came out recently with lower latency that they're able to do. So they're making some gains there, but it's still a concern with satellite technology and how, just the business model itself, you never know if that's going to fall apart at some point, because as you get these satellites up there in the constellation, it's not like fiber where you can put it in the ground or even coax or something where you can put it in the ground and it's good for years. You might have to go out to an area and, fix a cut or something like that, but you can do that pretty quickly. Whereas satellites, every 5 years or so, you've got to replenish that constellation, because the serviceable life of those satellites, they have to start taking them out of orbit. And you've got to start, in addition to launching new satellites, maybe to increase bandwidth that you've got to replace ones that are going to be going out of service and coming out of the atmosphere and burning up. So that's always a concern on the business model there. But there is a place for it today in areas that are very, very hard to reach, and some other areas like shipping and planes and backup from mobile services in areas that don't get good cellular coverage. There is a business model for it. The question is, will it be a long-term business model that can keep the satellites in space? Can it afford to do that? Mobile 5G in our coverage has not been physically deployed at minimum speeds of 35 by 3 megabits per second to roughly 9% of all Americans, to almost 36% of Americans in rural areas, and to more than 20% of people living on tribal lands. 45 million Americans lack access to both 100 by 20 fixed service and 35 by 3 mobile 5G NR service. Based on the new 1 gig per 1,000 students and staff short-term benchmark for schools and classrooms, 74% of school districts meet this goal. That's good. And by the way, in that, here it is. Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't read down here this part. The report also sets, and this was in the report back in November, it also sets a 1 gig by 500 meg long-term goal for broadband speeds to give stakeholders a collective goal toward which to strive, a better, faster, more robust system of communication for American consumers. So this is where it's talking about, let's eventually get everybody on fiber, because that's really what we're looking at there. I think the fastest of 5G service, maybe, I can't remember if a millimeter wave 5G service can do 500 up. It's possible, I think. But the issue there is that you have lots of small cells very close to each other that have to have line of sight. So it's not a service that you're going to need in an area where you can do that, because in an area where you've got lots of people clustered together very close by, you're going to have fiber. So 5G is best for those hard to reach areas where you don't have lots of people living close together, but you can still do, let's say, a mid-band spectrum, not millimeter wave, but a mid-band spectrum where you can get over the 100 by 20, but you're not going to get up to a gig by 500. So this is where we're saying, long-term goal, let's get fiber to everybody. And again, this goal here of 1 gig by 500, that's going to be reached for the majority of people. It's getting close to it now. And as we get BEAD deployed and get all of that fiber in the ground, that's going to be, again, most people are going to be getting fiber through BEAD. Then this goal is going to be it's going to be available to everybody that has the fiber service at that point, because everybody's pretty much at least going to be offering a gig symmetrical service, and some will be offering, like I say, they can put in XGS PON or 25 gigabit per second PON and sell those services, although they'll have a higher price, and whether people will take that or not is another question, because 1 gig is fine for everybody. And by the way, 25 by 3, not great. So obviously 10 by 1 was not great. 25 by 3, not great. But 100 by 20, most people can get by on 100 by 20 doing pretty much what they want to do. Even if they're doing Zoom calling, streaming like I'm doing, generally 100 by 20 is going to be capable to do that. So it's not like the people that are getting 100 by 20 are left out in the cold. They're just not going to be able to get the best speeds like everybody else is getting until we can get fiber there. Action by the Commission. March 14th, Chair 1, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's basically the end right there. So again, I went ahead and linked to this, and I linked to this page where you can download the report back from November and the inquiry that they did there, and that is a much bigger, longer document that I actually went through. I think it took me almost an hour to go through this back in November when it first came out. I didn't bother linking to that because I don't know if you want to read, I don't know if you want to spend, 57 minutes or whatever it was as I go through a document that was back from November. But that, if you wanted to look at the document or just check our channel and you will find that, you'll see that there. So I see a question here. Conway Fan 98. Hello, I now sit at 67 times slower download and 100 times slower upload than the new standard. That's insane. So yeah, I know you've been waiting patiently to get broadband, which was defined at 25 by 3, and this is a perfect example of how your speed, your speed may have dropped a little bit for real, I suppose, over time, but it just significantly dropped as far as the broadband definition, because again, as you raise the definition of broadband, then folks here like Conway Fan 98, who did not have broadband before, suddenly he's even further away from broadband. The good news is that if your provider, I think was it Charter, if your provider comes in and gets the RDOF, let's say they do the RDOF implementation and you get fiber out there, then suddenly you will be with everybody else that has fiber, and things will look good for you. But I know it's been very frustrating. So I hope you will continue to watch and update me as soon as you hear news as far as what's going on there in your area, because I'm hopeful that that you will get that, especially if it was Charter, because Charter they've been deploying a lot of fiber. I did a broadcast the other day about how they were the only cable operator that had gains in broadband subscribers last year, and it was pretty significant what they did. And my guess is that that was fiber and not cable modem service, because other cable operators like Comcast, they lost broadband subscribers. The only reason there was any hope was what Charter was doing, and I think that's probably them deploying fiber in new areas that would be from RDOF and other federal funding that they were able to take advantage of. So hopefully they are working their way towards you to do that. Thanks for joining me today. Give me a like on this if you liked the video, and if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and click the subscribe button down there in YouTube and then ring the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks for joining me again, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.